Good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us. On behalf of Futures Coast, I would like to warmly welcome you to today's live interview in our Building Future Leadership Dialogue series. This series highlights leadership shaped by lived experience, leadership grounded in humility, responsibility, and a deep commitment to coastal communities. Today's dialogue is a special one. We are honored to feature Novara One Planet and FEC affiliate project whose work exemplifies what it means to lead in uncertain, rapidly changing environments. For the past several years, coastkeepers Nigel Jolens and Veronica Lysett have been sailing through some of the world's most remote and climate-exposed regions. Along the way, they have engaged with communities living on the front line of coastal change, documenting both vulnerability and remarkable resilience. Their journey offers powerful lessons for emerging coastal leaders, listening deeply to local knowledge, navigating complexity with integrity, and bearing witness to change in real time. We are delighted to have them with us today. Our dialogue will be hosted by Professor Bruce Glavovic, who will guide the conversation as we explore the origins and mission of the World One Planet, key moments from the voyage, and insights from the coastal communities. Thank you all for being here. With that, I will now hand over to Bruce to begin the conversation.
Thank you so much, Shifang. And it really is a delight to be able to moderate this session. My name is Bruce Glavovic from Massey University, way down in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And right now, Nigel and Veronica are up in Alaska. It's the middle of the night for them. So thank you so much for making the time. I'll just say one or two quick things about Future Earth Coast for those that might not be familiar with it, and then hand over and start the conversation with Nigel and Veronica, who themselves I first met in New Zealand many long years ago in the early 2000s while both Nigel and Veronica had done postgraduate work here at Massey University. Got to know each other very well before they moved to Europe and on. And we'll hear a little bit more about themselves and how they came back on this incredible voyage. And so really looking forward to that conversation. For those of you not familiar with Future Earth Coasts, it's an organization that's part of the umbrella of an organization called Future Earth, and it's really a series of projects that bring different areas of specialization and interest together. Future Earth Coasts having obviously a focus on the coast, really a network of coastal scientists, specialists, practitioners, and this leadership dialogues initiative is part of an ongoing conversation to build and share experience across the globe with people involved in coastal, not just coastal research, but coastal management and coastal action. So it's an absolute pleasure, Nigel and Veronica. Thanks again. So we're really keen just to hear a bit more about yourselves, a bit more about Novara, what got you going on this journey. And I understand you've got a short video to share with us, so that will be brilliant. But if you might want to start with a few opening words before you jump into that. Over to you.
Great. Can you hear us, Bruce?
Yes, I can.
Cool.
Hey, thank you, Bruce and Leah. Lovely to be here.
Lovely to be here. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody. As you can see, it's a little cold where we are here in Alaska. And if we looked out our windows, it's about midnight here, and we're surrounded by mountains on the Kenai Peninsula. It's so good to see you again, Bruce. Bruce has been such an important part of our journey as one of our advisors and our board of advisor. And Bruce has also spent time with us on Novara before we attempted the Northwest Passage Arctic expedition last year. And Bruce, I'm sure you would absolutely love where we are at the moment. The wildlife here is incredible. So we were going to show a video, which a friend of ours prepared for us. And I'm just going to see if I can show that to you now. And let's just make sure that the audio comes through. So I'm going to play this, and then Bruce, just let us know if the audio is working. Can you hear that?
Veronica and I have been at sea now for 2 years. Both of us gave up our full-time jobs, sold our house, bought a boat.
Bruce, just checking that you can.
Yeah,
Oops.
perfect.
Yes, we can hear. Thanks.
Okay, brilliant.
Maybe if we'd known what we were getting ourselves in for, would we have still done it? I don't know.
We met a very long time ago. We originally met at university, but we didn't start seeing each other until a while after that, until we re-met. Honest, it's been bloody difficult at times, very difficult at times. The boat has challenged us when we started. Things have broken often.
The mission of Navara is not simply to sail around the world, but to connect with communities that are literally on the front line of the climate change challenge, coastal communities that are experiencing the impacts of extreme events compounded by global warming. And they set sail from South England and made their way right up through the Irish Sea, across the mid-Atlantic, into the Caribbean, and then up the northeast US coast to where we are now in Maine. And along the way, they've met with various people living on this front line and learning about what their experiences are and observing how people are coping and some of the challenges they face.
What do we do? Well, I think we've worked in like 15 or so communities in UK, Europe, Africa, Caribbean. We've got a set of skills. We turn up in communities that we've communicated with in advance, and we say, you know, these are the kind of things that we can help you with, and we listen to what they're doing and what the issues they're facing, and then we say, well, you know, maybe I could help you like this or like that, and they say yes or no.
Helping a community get the next step towards some point of adaptation or what it is that they're going to do to make their life better against the extreme weather events that are coming their direction.
Communities in low-lying coasts are experiencing more intense, more unpredictable, extreme events. Whether or not you believe in or know of the science behind climate change, the reality for people on the ground is things are changing, ecosystems are changing. How do you deal with that reality? That's the essence of what Nigel and Veronica are exploring.
I mean, from a kind of climate change community work, I would love it if some of the communities got access to money to incorporate climate changes in their future planning. You know, that for me feels like a big deal. Small changes at the community level. And we got a great crew. I mean, you know, the skills we've got on board, they all know the boat really well. Excellent engineering skills and good navigation. So if anyone can do it, we can.
I mean, we're not just the Novara One Planet project. We're a bunch of adventurers about to be extreme cold weather sailors.
Nigel and Veronica also live in the boat, so they require things that are different for someone who would just come and sail it for a couple of months. So the boat is very much a home. We were sharing someone's house for a long period of time.
What makes the Navara story so powerful is that through the voices of all these individual communities on the front line of climate compounded risk is a global story about navigating change. And so what Navara is doing is it's coming, in my mind, you know, as a species, we come from the sea ultimately. You know, those are our roots. And so Navara is coming from the sea back to land at a time when the sea is engulfing low-lying communities, and we're having to reconnect with this lived reality of a changing world.
So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea of who we are, what we're about. Maybe, Bruce, we just want to, anything that arises from that for you.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful for those that know little about Novara, and so it's given us a very strong visual picture of this journey that you've gone on. But it obviously began before you set sail from Dover all those years ago now. And maybe you just want to make a couple of observations about, what led you to embark on this journey, and what is the mission as you have lived this journey over the last few years.
Do you want to do mission?
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about the personal journey. You want to start off with?
Okay. So Nigel has sailed a lot more than I did, and we were living in London in the UK, and in the beginning of 2019, my sister died. And she passed away in New Zealand, and it was quite sudden. And so I had 2 long-haul flights from 24 hours flying time each from London to New Zealand, and then from Aotearoa, New Zealand, back to London. And Nigel had always dreamed of sailing to home to Aotearoa, and I wasn't that keen. But by the time I got back off those flights, my sister passing away was the 5th member of my family who had died under the age of 61, and I was 58 at the time, and I kind of said, well, life's for living, so how do we make that dream a reality? And that was the start. Well, it kind of was the starting point, although the starting point was a lot earlier because Nigel had always had that dream in his head. But I called you.
You called me on that dream, called my bluff. And so we carried on talking about how we could make the dream come true. And Veronica said, if I'm going to join, I want to go home an interesting way. I want to go through the Arctic. And I said, if we're going to do this, I want to do it with a sense of purpose. And I want to use this adventure to document stories from coastal communities on the impacts of climate compounded risk on them and their lived experience. And I think at the beginning of that, the purpose element, I guess we had fairly grandiose plans how we would go and help communities develop climate adaptation plans, because my background had been working in a development institution supporting local governments develop climate mitigation and adaptation plans. So I thought we could go and do the same sort of thing for local communities. But it turns out that coastal communities don't really need, at least the ones that we're encountering, don't really need that kind of support. They already know what's happening. What they need generally is money and financial resources to put in place the kinds of responses that they need to do. And they often need help deciding what to do, which is where Veronica comes in.
Yeah, so there were a couple of other elements in there. We kind of looked at the skill set that both Nigel and I had and said, what could we do that would take those skills and use them well? And we also looked at what was happening in the world in terms of coastal communities, and it was pretty obvious that the coastal areas that are most impacted by climate change are the Arctic, the Pacific, and the Caribbean. So we wanted to be able to have a vessel that would allow us to visit those 3 major broad areas. So, I mean, my background was I have a master's in counselling. I've been coaching and facilitating for 25-ish years. So, as Nigel mentioned, communities need money, and they also access to finance, and they also need sometimes a neutral, independent person to help them figure out what the next step is in the process. Someone who's not involved in the local politics, who doesn't know the history, who can be a an impartial voice on, okay, what needs to happen next. So I think that's kind of our skills. I do that side, and Nige helps finding access to money.
And that's really helpful for those that might be on the call now, who might listen on YouTube, that are part of the Future Earth Coast community, who are often doing research, sometimes on communities, sometimes with communities. And I think that what you're underscoring is that anyone that does this work with communities soon discovers that this is not just a technical challenge, that it's a challenge of livelihood, it's a challenge of local politics, it's a challenge of enabling people to navigate these difficult circumstances. So your critical combination of skills is a fantastic combination of some of the hard and soft technical and process skills that are essential for navigating these challenges. I wondered if you might want to add anything more about some of the crew members and some of the set of skills and some of the advisors that make up Novara as well, just so that people have a sense of the ecosystem that make up the Novara endeavor.
Yeah, that's really important part of this whole, the whole. When we came up with the idea of buying the boat and going off and doing this with this sense of purpose, we also knew that we needed some people behind us to support us on land, both directing us and providing advice, but also joining us at critical parts of the journey. And so we have a couple of patrons and a board of advisors. We are lucky enough to have Pippa Lady Blake as one of our patrons. She's the late wife, how do you say that? Of the widow, sorry, of Sir Peter Blake, a very famous sailor in New Zealand. She's almost royalty in New Zealand, I guess, from the Blake family. And we have Bob Shepton, who is one of probably the most experienced Arctic sailors, so from the expedition adventure side. And then on the advisor side, we called Bruce and said to Bruce, look, we've got this idea of working with communities. Would you be willing to be an advisor? And Bruce luckily accepted and has been walking with us, so to speak, for the last 4 years.
And sailing
with us. And I think that with Bruce being able to join us on the boat gave us an opportunity to reconnect, but also an opportunity for Bruce to understand what life on board Novara is, and our limitations, and how we go about living this itinerant life on the boat. The other advisors, we have my sister, who is she has a PhD in marine science and is currently an international consultant working on gender and equality and inclusion in the fisheries space, so very much coastal
in
the Pacific mostly. Yep.
And a former owner of Novara, Steve Brown.
And the former owner, Steve Brown, yeah.
Yeah. So Steve's role on board is, not only has he been the one who's been on engineering technical issues over the years, he was ice pilot when we went through the Arctic, so to advise us on how to deal with ice and how to navigate it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I wonder if you might want to move from the kind of characters and the ecosystem to some of the highlights and some of the challenges. What I was struck by in the weeks that I spent with you was just the intensity, the never-ending set of demands and things to be fixed or to be dealt with or planned for or provisioned for. And so the idea of having lots of time to sit back and kind of ponder the imponderables is a real figment of certainly my imagination early on. But highlights, challenges, some of the spotlighted experience that kind of, stay with you.
You're talking about both the boat life, but also the community work that we've done?
Yeah, maybe the voyage in particular as a point of departure, and then let's move to some of the learnings around your engagement with people on the ground.
Well, I think from my perspective, the highlight for the voyage would have to be the transit through the Arctic, the sort of west coast of Greenland and Arctic. And unfortunately, Bruce wasn't able to join us for that part. You left in Newfoundland. But just the sheer grandeur and the shocking, I think that and this is possibly a low light, the shocking lack of both ice and wildlife in the Arctic that we encountered last summer.
Yeah. Yes, I think those things are very noticeable. And I would say also, if we talk about the community work, that the time that we spent in Providencia in the Western Caribbean was absolutely brilliant. We had 7 weeks in a community where we were introduced to it by a local, and we worked with a number of community groups, subsistence, crab hunters, fisheries, those who are community emergency response teams. And we actually had the privilege, not on our boat, but on another boat of, excuse me, of revisiting Providencia just a couple of months ago. And so we were able to follow up with those community groups and see how they were going, and what progress they had made, and offer additional assistance, particularly Nigel with the artisan fishermen, and again assist getting access to finance. So those ongoing relationships, where we have the time to be in a community and to start essentially doing the facilitation, having the conversations, doing the planning, doing the funding applications. That was a highlight as well.
Yeah.
Maybe Agadir?
No, before we get on to the community stuff, I want to if I could tell a story about engine breaking down before we were just approaching a harbour. We'd had an all-night, so just a bit of a sailor's story to give you a sense of what our life is like. So we're in the Caribbean. It's 2023, 24. 24, yeah, middle of 24. And we're approaching the island of Tobago. We'd just sailed through the night from Grenada. We'd sailed at night because the area in those days, possibly still, was well known for piracy attacks on lone vessels. So we'd sailed through the night against the Gulf Stream into oncoming wind. So it was very rough, very dark, because we had all of our instruments off and all of our navigation lights off to avoid pirates. Just the two of us on board, and we are approaching Tobago, and there are rocks about a mile away, the harbour entrance about 2 miles away, and our engine cuts out. We've got no idea what's going on, but it's not something that we had planned. And
it's early morning. It is light now.
It's early morning. We're both exhausted, and we're drifting towards these rocks. We look at each other, and this is not uncommon for things to break on a boat. Let's put it that way. And by this stage, we're pretty over everything breaking. So we look at each other and are just about to break into oh my God, I'm sick of this. Let's just sink the boat. And we said, look, we've really got to survive this. Let's put our moaning aside, solve this problem, get into anchor, and then we can have a good old moan about it. So we did. We raised the sails and managed to sail into harbour, which, for those of you who are sailors, you may know that a boat of this size sailing into a harbour is not often done. Usually you would motor in, mainly because manoeuvring a boat under sail in small confined spaces is not straightforward. So we sailed in, we dropped the anchor under sail. Again, not something that we've ever done before or since. We were so proud of ourselves for doing that.
With the assistance of a local fisherman who basically said, you know, go left, go right, drop now. Mm-hmm.
We were so proud of ourselves that we completely forgot to have a moan about the fact that the engine had broken down and that we'd survived. So that was one of many stories. Crossing the Atlantic on this boat was quite an adventure. We had a lot of issues. Yeah. So there you go. That gives you a bit of a sense of the kind of thing that we do. And just one last point on that. Because we come from the sea, because we're on a boat, when we turn up at coastal communities who are invariably connected to the sea as fisher folk, we're able to connect with them in a way that you can't when you turn up on an aeroplane with a briefcase.
I'd just like to add a particular emphasis on that. It's not just the coming from the sea. It is that when you live a lifestyle like we do, you are in touch with the tides, with the wind, with the sunrise, the sunset, the whether it's going to rain or not. All your senses are constantly alert to what is happening in nature, and how nature and the Earth as a planet impacts on the people who occupy this planet. And when we returned for 6 months over when it was too cold to sail up in Alaska, we returned to land in Europe. And I immediately remembered the disconnect of being in a large city where you do not know when sunrise or sunset is, or whether it's raining, or whether it's windy, or whether it's cold. Or we
the state of the tides.
The state of the tides, the weather, the moon, what's happening with the cycle of the moon. None of that. You're disconnected from nature, and we are connected in a way that most people who are living off the land, off the sea, are connected, and that immediately gives us a point of reference and a contact in a way that you don't get when you arrive with a briefcase on an aeroplane and you're saying, oh yes, it's Thursday, therefore I must be in wherever.
That's fantastic. I think it's a great segue to ask you to share some reflections about some of the commonalities and some of the differences in the very diverse communities that you've interacted with, and just what some of your personal observations and reflections and interactions of some of the challenges that are being faced, awareness and potential solutions that people are doing, and any reflections on kind of engaging with people to understand and work through some of those challenges in such different circumstances. Some examples, maybe.
Sure. I think the first commonality, so you asked about commonalities and challenges and some examples. So the first commonality is that every community that we've approached has direct and clear experience of climate changes. There's even in the United States, where we are at the moment, every community, every person that we interact with is very clear that climates are changing and that they're affecting their communities profoundly. I think that's for me absolutely clear.
Just to add to that, there is no need to raise awareness.
Yeah.
Right. We spoke to a class of psychology, fourth year psychology, climate psychology students, and they asked about raising awareness. And it is only those who live disconnected from the earth who have a need to raise awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Those who are connected to the planet and the seasons and what happens, there's, that they're not, it's not even an issue. It is.
It's very clear.
It's
for
real.
Yeah. So I think that for me, that's the first common theme that we've experienced, that I've experienced while we've been doing this. Another common experience is that invariably coastal communities that we've been visiting, okay, we've visited the New Yorks as well and the Londons and that sort of thing, but we're talking the smaller coastal communities being peripheral from centers of power are also peripheral to centers where resources are available. And they're invariably at the sort of complete end of the financing pipeline. And so access to financial resources is extremely challenging. And I'll give you an example. Providencia, that Veronica mentioned earlier, a small island of, how many people on the island? 8,000, I'm thinking, something like that. 8,000 people. Was completely wiped out. 98% of all infrastructure was destroyed in Hurricane Iota in 2020, in November.
During COVID.
So that's, what's that? 6.5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. 5.5 years later, the fishing collective called Fish and Farm still haven't had their fishing boats replaced. In fact, they lost 3 fishing boats. So these are artisanal fishers are allowed to have boats that are less than 50 feet, if I'm not mistaken. And so they had 3 fishing boats that were 40 feet or thereabouts that were completely destroyed. One of them evidently turned up several hundred miles away in Nicaragua. Now, why haven't they had their fishing boats replaced? Because they can't access money. They've accessed commercial finance to replace outboard engines because there's been no financial support from the government or anything. And they're paying very high rates of interest. And of course, they're not willing to take out more debt for the replacement of their vessels, which is going to be something in the order of $1 million, which is way beyond these artisanal fishers' capabilities. So as a result, they are using skiffs, so 22-foot open dinghies, we would call them, to do the same function that the big 40-foot enclosed ships would have done, which means they're going 100 miles offshore to atoll vessels that are not fit for purpose in seas that are extremely treacherous. They don't have any sleeping facilities on board, and yet they spend multiple days out. So there's no protection from the sun in the Caribbean. So all of those things mean that they're putting their lives at risk now extremely in order to continue with their livelihoods because they can't access money. Now, one of the things that we've been able to help them with is access grant money and then to participate in the procurement process for them to get their first fishing boat, which, fingers crossed, touch wood, whatever you do to make it good luck. It looks like they're in the process of getting their first boat by the end of this year, in part because of some of the work that we've done and in part because of other work. But, because they're just so far removed from centers of power, access to this money and their ability to interact with whether it's government or finance providers is so challenging for them, as they're fisher folk. They don't know about how to interact with people with suits, and they're presented with multiple copies of legal documents that, and they don't, they speak a Creole. So dealing with legal English or legal Spanish is a challenge for them. Anything. So back to you, Bruce.
Oh, that's just such a fantastic example of just the deep, deep challenges that these communities face. And what you've been sharing is the many different remote and not just remote from those centers of power, as it were, even if they're physically potentially close, distant by history and so on. That doesn't matter whether they're in the Caribbean or the Arctic or in the Mediterranean. The same underlying challenges faced. And I wonder if you have any quick observation. I'm mindful of time because I'd like to, in the next 2-3 minutes, transition to asking if there are questions from those that have joined the call. But just before we get there, are there some solutions? Are there some ways through these difficulties that you've been observing that you might like to share? And what are your thoughts about ways to work with people in such difficult, fragile circumstances that might be helpful for those that are involved in coastal research and advocacy?
I might do the second part first and let Nigel think on the first part. So the second part first, I think when we set off, and mainly we had no idea of coastal advocacy work when we started, but I came from a counseling and coaching perspective where the philosophy is that I have some skills and process, but the content always belongs to the person or people that I'm working with. And so we never arrive with an agenda. We always arrive asking, hey, we've got some skills here and you've got some needs here. Where might they align? And if there's some alignment, great. And if there's no alignment, lovely to meet you, and have a conversation and find out a little bit more about you. And that's wonderful as well. So that philosophical base is that we are truly community led. We do not know what we're going to find, and we do not know what the next step in a process may be, whether a fishing community needs to negotiate between the power struggle of the two leaders, or whether a fishing community needs access to money, or whether they need access to legal support or whatever. So the first thing that we are doing is listening. And then we listen some more. And then we offer a tentative, okay, so what I'm hearing is this, is that what you are actually wanting? And somebody will say yes, and somebody will say no. So we do some more listening until we get to a point where it is, okay, so now there's an agreement that step A is the next step to take. That truly locally led I'm finding is quite rare. And is also for me the only way that feels has the integrity that we wish to take with us on this journey.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think locally led adaptation is a kind of, let's say, guiding principle for us. And this is in part guided by people like Bruce, who've been on our advisory board and encouraging us to take such approach, as well as it is Veronica's natural approach and professional approach in dealing with those things. In terms of solutions, I'm not sure I can identify a common solution across communities that we've worked with, but I can give you an example of something that I think is potentially common, or was certainly, I think, useful, and that was in the city of Agadir in Morocco. We helped raise, how do I put this? The city of Agadir in Morocco sits on the Atlantic coast. It's subjected to, in general, it's quite an arid climate and fairly temperate. In August 2023, they had a massive heat wave, unprecedented. They had 3 days where temperatures soared above 50 degrees Celsius. And this is unheard of. They sit on the edge of the Sahara, but because of where they sit geographically, they very rarely get warm, hot weather. Anyway, that prompted them to think about adapting to these climate extremes. When we arrived, they had in development a whole lot of climate mitigation things that they were working on, but hadn't been able to articulate climate adaptation. And so one of the things that we did is we held an all-day workshop with the community leaders and both from the city government, but also from academia and from civil society about how to integrate adaptation and resilience elements into their thinking about dealing with climate change. So don't just focus on the mitigation elements, but also integrate adaptation. And so I think that led them to a bit of a sea change for them. We worked with them to develop a checklist that they could use whenever they're making decisions around community resourcing to look at the implications for the climate adaptation. So that was one example from Agadir in Morocco. What about the one in Johaven? Just talking about how people needing support, because the people who often work in this environment on climate change and community governance. Do you want to talk about that?
So when we were in Johaven, which has a historic significance because of when Amundsen first went through the Northwest Passage in 1906, so this is Canadian Arctic, Johaven was where he stopped as he had successfully got through the most difficult part of the passage.
We're talking the high Arctic here.
We're talking the high Arctic. So yeah, I mean we're
70 degree. No, it'd be more. It'd be like 72 degrees north
latitude, and in winter they have minus 54 degrees in terms of temperature, just to give you an idea. So the community there is a small hamlet, and basically they, as you can understand, they have a lot of difficulty attracting and retaining staff. And when we arrived, there was a new staff member who the leadership in the community wanted a new person to arrive, but they weren't sure that they had the skills to step up to being number 2 in charge. So my job as a coach was to work with that person and to keep an ongoing coaching relationship with them so that they can be supported in their new role of being number 2 in the Hamlet administration, which is what I've been doing for the last year, and well, nearly a year, 9 months. And so it's another practical way that we have been offering support for a community that is totally on the edge of climate change and every day facing major issues around climate adaptation.
Doesn't it raise the kind of the issue that a lot of people working in this space, whether they be researchers or community governance people or just civil society leaders working on climate related issues in particular, often run the risk of getting burnt out because it's so demanding and it's invariably under-resourced. And this is the sort of thing that Veronica is offering support to people to help them cope with both the workload and the work-life challenges.
Oh, fantastic. I'm keen to, I mean, it's just such a rich set of stories. I'm keen to just open the floor to anyone that's got some questions. I do want to come back before we close up to check in with you as to your future plans, just to share that. But let's return back to that to the extent that you know what those might be, depending on which way the wind blows. But are there questions from the floor? Anyone got any burning questions? Eshan, I'm not sure that I pronounced your name correctly, but my apologies if not, but go ahead, please.
It's okay. Thank you so much, Bruce. And sorry, my camera is not working today. Have no idea why. First of all, thank you so much, Veronica and Nigel, for sharing your inspiring story. It's really nice. By the way, I am a research fellow at the University of Portsmouth, School of Environment and Life Science in England. So I'm really interested, like to shift usually I use space or Earth observation data to study environmental applications, most related to climate change, temperature rising, things related, to disaster management, so any kind of environmental applications. But nowadays I'm trying to shift a bit more to studying coastal, changing in coastal. So, and at the same time, I wanted to integrate actually the social science. So people knowledge, the traditional knowledge, local, knowledge is really important to be able to understand what is happening. So my question to you, what local knowledge or traditions do you think should be protected or shared more widely to the other community from your experience? Thank you.
Thank you, Ehsan, for your question. I think that the local knowledge is at the heart of what needs to be shared, and often it is overlooked by somebody who is an expert who comes in to say what should be shared. But for example, I'm thinking about when we were in the island of with the root vegetables. What's Dominica.
Mhm.
So we spoke with the Kalinago, who are the indigenous people in Dominica, and the Kalinago, they have been First Nations. They have been on that land, on those islands for thousands of years. Of course, they have experienced many hurricanes, and the frequency and the severity of them is changing, but they know how to deal with hurricanes. And one of the things that they do is that they ensure that they have tuber crops that are planted during the hurricane season. So if a hurricane comes through and wipes out everything above ground, they still have food that can be accessed underground, right? This is a very simple example, but it's one of those examples of how that knowledge and experience is fundamental to maintaining life, essentially.
Resilience.
In that particular environment. It's a tiny example, and it is that principle of that the locals have more knowledge, have more experience than anybody else who comes in from afar.
I wonder now, just to Bruce, I wonder if it's appropriate to mention our podcast, because Ehsan, your question is a really good one. And one of the things that we have been trying to do is to share local stories of both solutions and challenges through our podcast. And I'm just going to send a link now in the chat to our podcast series. We've got I think 6 or 7 episodes up at the moment. We've recorded another 5 that we're working on releasing, and these are as diverse as Agadir through to Providencia in Scotland and so on. And all of these are stories about local knowledge and sharing of local experience and solutions.
Yeah, I'm going to go to Debbie in 1 second, and just to underscore the work that you're doing often is bridging and bringing together and making visible the local knowledge in these places of power. It could be the local administrative office, or it could be a provincial office. And so it's bringing these different knowledges together, and so that there's no one party, no one community that can deal with this stuff by themselves. They've got to be working with Indigenous people, with local communities, with local government, with provincial or state government, etc. So, Debbie, you have a question. You have your hand up. Over to you.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. I live boat access only in the Marlborough Sounds, in Queen Charlotte Sound, Tōtaranui. Excuse me, can you hear me all right? I've had a cold, which is partly why I had my video off earlier. I was coughing and spluttering. It wasn't conducive to others trying to pay attention. I really just wanted to offer a comment, not so much a question, but just absolute amazement to the two of you for your own resilience. I am just blown away. I think, particularly having lived off grid and boat access only and experienced severe weather events in Marlborough, and the battering that has gone around psychologically for our community, I just cannot begin to imagine what it must be like to be on a boat traveling, just trying to, as you expressed, survive with the elements, monitor and actually do productive professional work as well. I'm in absolute awe, and to be able to sit on a call like this, be coherent, have the ability to express all the things that you have done. I just found it absolutely amazing. So well done and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie.
Debbie.
You should have seen us about 5 hours ago. There was not much coherent.
just to give you a bit of context on Veronica's comment. So we had to pass around today, earlier today, we had to pass around the south end of the Kenai Peninsula, which has the second largest tidal range in the world. And that means that there is huge amounts of water flowing around this peninsula, which means that wherever this water is moving at pace, the sea state becomes very rough. So today we've had 15 hours of moving the boat through this treacherous sea called the Chugach Passage. And we chose a weather window because we needed to come through in a very basic weather system, an easy weather system. 15 hours later, we've turned up in a bay that is not charted, unfortunately. So we had to spend pretty much an hour nosing our way around this bay, working out what the depths were where we could drop anchor. We're now on anchor watch because if any wind comes up, we need to be able to respond. So we don't often get a proper night's sleep when we're at anchor. Our radar stopped working for some unknown reason. And we also want to do things like this. Yes, living on a boat brings another level of vigilance. There's a constant level of vigilance we have to have in order to stay safe, and that can be exhausting sometimes.
But I'm sure in the same vein, just as there are extreme challenges, there are extreme peaks as well. And to go back to Veronica's comment about after experiencing loss and grief, to really live. And that's also partly why I live in a boat access only remote area too. So I relate to that. But as I say, I'm just absolutely in awe of your tenacity. Just amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm mindful of time. We've only got a few minutes left. Does anybody else have any burning questions or comments that they wish to share with Nigel and Veronica? If not, I would really encourage you all to get onto Novara One Planet, their webpage. You'll have access to the route that they've been on, access to the podcasts and other information. And so if you're interested in the story and in the experiences, whether it's the sailing, whether it's the community work, do go and have a look. I wonder if this isn't a good opportunity or good moment to just ask you where you go to from here and what you're expecting to come from where you are now.
So we pretty much were focused on crossing the Atlantic, getting into the Arctic and the Northwest Passage trip. So we've got the next 6 months as being relatively easy for us, which is to come to have family and friends visit us on Novara as we work our way south down the Alaska and Alaska and British Columbia's coast towards Vancouver and hopefully down to Mexico, the Baja Peninsula. And then we have a decision to make as to whether we cross the Pacific into New Zealand or kind of what happens next. And partly that depends on context and the communities that we can engage with in the Pacific. If we find that we could be of some value to those communities, then we will happily go into the Pacific. But if so that's the aim. It's a long way to get by boat from New Zealand back to Europe to eventually sell her, because we won't do this forever. She's a very Novara needs a lot of physical work, so I'm starting to notice that my knees creak. So so I won't do this forever.
Can I just say that our next community engagement is scheduled for Sitka, which is the original capital of Alaska. It's about 500 miles that away, and we are aiming to be there in early July. So we've got 6 weeks now of friends and family visiting before we do our next community engagement work there with, we've got three different groups we're working with.
That sounds fantastic. Time is up. Do follow up with Novara One Planet. They share information on a regular basis, keep track of the journey. Thank you for the questions, and Debbie, your observations are really spot on in terms of this is work that takes courage. And I think for me, that's my parting observation for those of you that are wanting to work in a coastal context, whether it's as an academic researcher, whether it's as a community activist, do this work with courage, because the people you work with are often literally on the front line of the climate change challenge. And no one can navigate this on their own. We can only do this work together. And so those of you that are working, whether it's in a research capacity, whether it's in a management capacity, whether you're a student and learning or an older person, do this work with courage, and you can and must make a difference, because the coast is really the front line of this climate crisis. And the work that Nigel and Veronica have been doing in this adventure, this journey, this expedition is revealing these stories, which are the shared stories of humanity, really. So thank you so much for making the time, Nigel and Veronica. It's now 1 a.m. in the morning for you guys, and you've got another day full, no doubt, after 15 days of traversing such challenging waters. It makes my day seem like a cakewalk. Thanks to each of you that have joined. Thank you, Shifang, for organizing this, and all the very best. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's
Thank
lovely
you,
to be here.
Bruce. Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks,
for those
everyone.
of you